Everybody, I'm Diane Cohen with MacroPro, and I want to welcome you to our summer school series here at the MacroPro University. I don't know why all of a sudden my voice is cracking, so my apologies for that. So today we're going to be talking about stopping leaks and why we have what happens to fraud cases when this does happen, and most importantly, we're going to talk about how to fix them. Because when we have these issues, they can derail our files, and we want to make sure that we catch that before it does. We have Chris Gutierrez here today joining us as our expert. Thank you, Chris, so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yes, well, since it's a summer school series, I'd like to get our audience and our guest a little bit familiar with the GoToWebinar platform. So for those of you that are in our audience, I'm going to ask you a question, and then Chris, if you would answer it afterwards. So if you would put your answers inside of the question box, I'd like to know, do you have any summer plans? Do you have any summer plans? And so Chris, do you have any summer plans?
That's the million-dollar question. Summer usually for me is being intentionally restorative, which is my fancy way of saying being lazy. Um, but but that's a little bit difficult to do sometimes. But still, I try to find time to just spend time with the family. If I can go to the beach or to an island and sip a mai tai and just read a book, that's kind of my ideal time. So I'll make sure to get once or twice that in this summer.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I think we all love to have that type of relaxation, restorative, or laziness, as you call it. I think we all
Yeah,
need that from time to time. Okay, so
totally.
before we get started, I have a little bit of housekeeping that I want to do. Today's webinar is worth one CEU credit. You must be logged on to the GoToWebinar platform with your own link so that your name is what shows up on the certificate. So we have handouts that are attached, so you can go to the materials portion and download that. You want to make sure you do that before the webinar is over so that you can either refer to it after the webinar, or if you want to follow along, that's fine, but it's going to be on the screen, so let's watch it there. And then lastly, if you have any questions, go ahead and put your questions in the box, and I will read those to Chris, and we will get to them hopefully as they come along. And Chris, I am looking here that there are people making comments about what they're going to do. I see people are going on cruises. So they're going to go into Puerto Vallarta. Chris is going to a few concerts. Lacey is, it's all starting to move. So there's so many people are doing it. So there's more cruises, concerts, country music. We hear that
I see Alaska. That sounds
Alaska.
cold, but cool.
Well, not in the summertime. They got days for almost 24 hours, which is amazing. If you've never done it, it is quite the trip. I
Yeah.
remember walking on a cruise ship and it was like 11 o'clock at night and the sun hadn't come down yet. So it is really cool. So, yeah, we have some really, really great trips. I see a lot of cruises. Somebody else is going to Europe for 2 weeks. That is amazing. Who wouldn't want to be in Europe for 2 weeks? All right. Well, keep
Yeah.
them coming. I will look at those. Chris, the floor is now yours.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for having me again, and thanks everyone for taking the time to join today. I want to start by sharing a quick experience I had a couple years ago. So I was a new SIU investigator. This was back when I was like 20. I just turned 21 years old, and I was working for a carrier at the time in their SIU department. I had this really interesting case where an insured, and at the time I was investigating personal auto. So I had this insurer that basically reported their vehicle was stolen, and then within 24 hours, the vehicle was recovered burned in an alley next to a school. And that vehicle fire caught a furniture store on fire as well. That furniture store did not have insurance, so basically the business owners were fully on the hook for that, unless, like many of you claims geeks here would know that there's a subrogation aspect to it, but that can take some time, and there's a whole process. Anyways, um, to make a long story short, there was a lot of components within the case that made it appear very evident that there was fraud involved in that file. However, when I conducted, a couple of weeks worth of investigation, I submitted it over to the DA's office. Within like 48 hours, they rejected my case. They were not going to file it. And that was very frustrating, because not only from an SIU perspective, but what kept playing in my mind were those business owners that were basically on the street, if you want to call it that way, because their business of like 40 years had been completely burnt as a result of this vehicle. The DA's office gave me some feedback at the time as a newer SIU investigator. I went back, I implemented that along with some more tenure peers of mine, and we ended up building a really good case after it submitting it. And I ended up being able to prove that it was the insurer that was behind on his payments. He had taken, catch this, a title loan with a 200% interest rate. I didn't even think that was legal. And it was basically for like $4,000, but the loan was outrageous, as you can imagine, from being 200% interest. So there was all sort of financial incentives to get rid of that vehicle, because the vehicle now it's costing more than the value that's outing to this insured. And this insured found it easy. Hey, I'll just take it to an alley, after the midnight hours, and just burn the car, and then say that it was stolen from outside my residence and that it was recovered burned. Here's the thing, though: when you burn a car intentionally, there's fire patterns that indicate where the fire originated from. And so his story was, it must have been, I don't know, like the battery or somebody, trying to get me back for something, burned the car. But it was actually a tool that we all carry on our phones, which looks like this, that ended up being, helping us prove that he was just within 2 feet away from that car when it burned, the night that it burned. And he claimed that he was at home sleeping at the time. So that gave us the motive for getting rid of the car, which was the financial aspect, and then the opportunity, which is being 2 feet away from the car when he claimed he was in bed. We were able to get that in correlation with some security footage from a nearby business, which showed this person in a particular attire running away from the scene. And then we were able to get the police officer's body cam footage when the insured walked inside the police department to make this report. And catch this, he was wearing the same attire as that person that was running away. So all those things in combination resulted in a couple felony counts for this insured, and he was convicted of it in LA County. But there was a lot of lessons that I took from that case, and then that helped me apply those later on as I filed more cases across multiple counties within California. So, a quick disclaimer: this is obviously not legal advice. Always check with your internal counsel or company policies and procedures. What I'm going to be sharing here today, they're practical tips and experience. Take those, take them with a grain of salt. They're not absolute, but there's things that have worked for us in the past very well. And this is across multiple lines too: personal auto, commercial, workers' comp, general liability. And primarily. So, a quick background about myself. So, Chris Gutierrez, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Strike National Investigations. We're a contracted SIU and investigations firm. Here in the US, we operate in 49 states with the exception of Alaska. I saw somebody going to Alaska. It's just too cold to do surveillance there, but we're still thinking about it. I'm also a content creator. We have a YouTube channel called PI Uncovered, and I put out, videos on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and other platforms on how to protect yourself against scams. So definitely check that out, Chris, at the PI. Just a shameless plug there. So why do fraud cases fail? Going back to the story that I shared initially, it almost always isn't because there isn't fraud present in the claim, is because the case wasn't built properly. It wasn't built the right way. And so that's when we get a big F from the district attorney's office. And why do I keep mentioning the district attorney's office? That's because they're the prosecuting entity. Anytime that there's a crime committed, whether the police department's investigating it, whether SIU is investigating it, whoever is investigating it, ultimately you have to file that case with the corresponding district attorney's office. And that's a whole separate topic about how to determine jurisdiction, and that could be a separate training. And today we're not going to cover that. But once you file that, the district attorney's office needs to be able to basically prove that this person committed this felony or this crime. And oftentimes they will reject it, not because they don't believe the crime was committed, but because the case was not built the right way. So, how do we fix that? Right? I think all of you joined today because you're probably dealing with a lot of claims that have elements of fraud or suspicion of fraud, right? And we never want to say there's absolutely fraud being committed here, because an absolute stage would be when somebody's actually committed a bit. However, we can say with a high degree of certainty or high suspicions that there's potential fraud or there's a suspicion of fraud. And so, how do we fix those cases? And how do we fix that frustration of it just keep getting kicked back or nobody ever doing nothing about it? That is for the next episode. We're not going to cover that today. Just kidding. Don't start logging off yet. We are going to cover that today. I just decided to crack a quick joke because why not? Um, there is also one investigative step that makes all the difference when you're filing cases and you want to get them prosecuted. And because I want to make sure that you get the value in between, I'm going to tell you this step at the end. So definitely stick around for that. Before we do that, though, let's watch a quick video of a recent operation. Some of my friends over at the California Department of Insurance Enforcement Branch filed. And what you're going to be seeing here is what's called Operation Bear Claw. So what happened, what you're seeing here is this is security footage of a cabin in Big Bear. That's a Rolls Royce parked in a driveway, and you're seeing a bear or something that appears like a bear crawl inside the house. And this bear is being very gentle with the car. I've investigated claims where a bear destroys a car, and this bear was actually able to somehow pull the handle open. And they're being very careful with the interior of the car. I don't know, maybe the bear knows it's a Rolls Royce, so they're just want to be gentle with the car. I'm gonna fast forward a little bit here and to show you some of the damage that the bear caused. Look at that. I mean, that is very linear, very surgical nail markings from this bear. My question, though, when I saw these photos was, who's the bear's nail technician? I mean, to get it that linear, they must be doing an amazing job. But the bear didn't just do this once. It came back after some time, and now it did it to an AMG, a G63. And if some of you are familiar with a G63, I mean, these cars can go a $250,000, $300,000, $350,000. Again, the bear is being very gentle and just kind of going inside. And it seems like the bear does not like the residents of this cabin, because over time the bear kept coming back and it just kept damaging just enough the seats and the leather inside, but not ripping it, just scratching it a little bit, where you could still operate the car but still get a payout for the damages. And here's the third time the bear did that. This was a cheaper model Mercedes, but still, they're higher end cars, and the bear is just like going through all this stuff. Here's what detectives found when they raided that cabin. They found the bear had been murdered. Uh, just kidding. They found the suit of the bear, and they ended up proving that the insured and some friends, ended up orchestrating all this. They decided to dress like a bear, and no wonder. Look at the claws down there. Those knives. Why the striations were so linear. Um, that's just some examples of some things that sometimes come up. I mean, this is This is some crazy stuff. Here's another case. I was actually working for Liberty Mutual Insurance in their SIU department when this happened, and this was one of my colleagues that investigated this case. And this guy was grabbing some ice, and then he decides to look around. There's nobody. Oh, my eyes kind of fell on the ground. He's nice enough to still throw the cup. Not all criminals are bad. He's a nice guy doing that. And then he's like, oh, let me see. Okay, like, yeah, okay, all right, here we go. All right. And obviously, we all witnessed it. He slipped and fell as a result of the eyes, and now he's like permanently disabled for the rest of his life, and he can't do anything. And that's what the demand letter indicated once it landed in the claim file. There was obviously an attorney involved. This attorney was actually not an attorney that was in our radar. This was an attorney that didn't seem much questionable history, but they did not know about this video. And then once we actually sat down with them on a deposition, and you don't want to reveal your ace cards at the front, you want to ask all these questions. What were you doing, and how did you fall? And they'll cry during the deposition, and it's just so traumatic to recount all this. And then eventually you show them the video of how this happened, and then they run out of the room, and then the attorney's like, cut down the depot. Yeah, no more interviewing. And then it gets filed with this district attorney's office. So before we start talking about how to fix fraud cases and how to actually get them prosecuted, it's important that we understand the elements of fraud. And it's actually four basic elements. We need to prove that there's knowledge and intent to defraud the insured or the insurance company, the insurer, um, when the claim is filed. We need to prove that there was material misrepresentation. We're going to go a little bit more into each of these four here in a minute. We need to prove that there was some sort of financial gain, whether it was actual financial gain or potential financial gain. And we need to be able to identify who the perpetrator is, and I'll explain why that's important. Now, we also need to understand the different burdens of proof, because when we are investigating a claim from an SIU perspective, to be able to deny that claim, oops, to be able to deny that claim, we do not need to prove beyond reasonable doubt that this person misrepresented some sort of material element or material information during the claim. We just need to be able to tilt the scale. Imagine like a scale of justice, and it's very equal like this. You need to just add one feather on one side so it tilts it a little bit, 49-51, and make it more likely than not that this claim is not valid, and then that would be sufficient, along with some other contributing factors, to be able to have an affirmative denial. Obviously, there's different things that contribute there, but we don't need to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Now, once there's a suspicion of fraud and you want this case to be filed and you want this case to be prosecuted, um, I'm curious, as I'm speaking about this, drop in the comment section how many of you are employers, how many of you are claims adjusters, how many of you are risk managers, what's your role, and how many of you are brokers, and do you have a say? Are you usually somebody that is pushing for this, or asking for claims to be um, push for prosecution? Let's see. So we have a lot of adjusters, self-insured. Great. Awesome. So we have a good mixture here. So again, it's important to understand that once we are going to submit a case for prosecution, now we need to meet the criminal element and the criminal burden of proof, not just the standard claim burden of proof. And that criminal burden of proof, it's called beyond reasonable doubt. So basically, it's proof that at a certain level makes it unreasonable that this would have otherwise not happened how we are presenting it. So there's no possible reason or no possible alternative of why this does not happen as we're presenting it. that bear claw. All the evidence indicates that is the insured misrepresenting that they had the intent to, the knowledge and intent to defraud the insurance company, the insured, the insurer, and that there was no other way or no other person that orchestrated this other than them. It sounds simple, but it's actually a little more complicated to be able to meet that. And ironically enough, as an investigator myself and being on the defense side, defending a lot of you on the investigative aspect, I'm actually glad that the burden of proof is that. Why? Because that eliminates people from being wrongfully convicted. Now, it is frustrating in certain states, such as California, that sometimes have certain regulations in place that make it much more difficult than other states to be able to prosecute this. But I still believe that there needs to be at least some sort of burden that needs to be met, to be able to prosecute somebody so that we don't get the wrong person. Um, anyways, so let's um, let's dissect some of these a little bit more. And element number one, so knowledge and intent. How do we prove that somebody had knowledge and intent to defraud you at the time that they filed a claim? Just so that, again, so that I can get some perspective of the audience here, how many of you drop what line of insurance you're usually involved in? Are you handling auto? Is that personal, commercial? Is it workers' comp, general liability? What type of claims are you dealing with? Let's see. We
Okay,
have a
we
lot
got
of
workers'
workers' comp.
compensation, we got auto and GL, we got workers' compensation. That seems to be the majority. We have
Great.
self-insured workers' compensation as well.
Great. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to use workers' compensation a lot as an example since we have a good majority of the audience here, that deal with workers' comp. So think about, I'm going to, create an imaginary character. We have John Doe, and John Doe is your employee. And John Doe shows up, um, one day. This is actually a real case that we investigated, but I'm changing the name. John Doe is a police detective, and John Doe works for a city. John Doe shows up one day at your office, let's say on Tuesday. John Doe shows up at your office and says, "Hey, by the way, um, Diane, I was working out at the gym yesterday at the city gym before my shift, and I injured my right forearm while I was weightlifting." Okay. All right. So tell me what happened, right? And what hurts and what's the level of pain, on a scale 1 to 10, which again, I'm going to throw this tip out there. Pain scales, they're subjective. We cannot prosecute based on that because if somebody says, well, my pain level is a 9, their 9 is different than your 9. And so it needs to be much more objective than that. So just think about that. That could be a whole different training there, but think about objective questions. What is a question that I can ask that this person can answer and they could not kind of deviate that or twist it once it comes to getting on the stand? How do I make that a true 7 rather than their 7 and I had a perception of a different 7 out of 10? So anyways, you ask, John Doe what the deal is, and they give you the whole spill, usually, right? You complete that initial report of injury, you file the claim, and there we go. Now, at some point, there's something weird. Something doesn't make sense. It could be the claim history of this employee. It could be maybe facts that um, their facts were not, they just didn't seem to make sense as they were translating them over to you. Like their stories seem all over the place. Something's just off. So then you trigger an SIU referral, or you obviously trigger an investigation. Hey, let's talk to this person. Let's see what's going on, right? Um, how do you prove that this person knowingly and intentionally filed this claim with the intent to defraud you? considering again that in this scenario, it actually turned out to be a fraudulent claim. Well, there's a couple of things that have to happen, right? One, hint, hint, we need to talk to the employee. Right? We need to get their version of the story. Yes, they might have given you an initial report. They might have given the doctor some sort of statement, but we need to talk to them directly and we need to get their version and lock him into a particular timeline and very objective markers of what they cannot do, how this happened, what time they arrived to the gym, how this, when they first started feeling pain, when did they realize that they were injured, and when did they make the decision to file a claim, all these things. Then through that process, we need to be looking for material misrepresentation. Is the employee lying to us, or did they lie to us? And if they did, when? But it's not just about any lie, it's about a material lie. So again, going back to John Doe's except Detective Doe here, let's say we sit down and we ask him a question. We say, hey, John, right? Another tip, we never want to address them usually in an interview by their title. It gives them some sort of level of authority. So we want to level with them. So instead of saying Detective Doe, we usually say John. So we have a conversation. So, hey, John, what type of phone do you use? Right. And let's say John says, hey, I use an iPhone. And then later on through the investigation, we find that they actually use an Android. Boom. We got them, right? John lied to us during a recorded statement where they declared under penalty of perjury that they were going to tell us the truth and nothing but the truth. Put it in the comments section. Is that a material lie? That John told us that he uses an iPhone, but he actually betrayed the iPhone community and he uses an Android. Not that there's anything wrong with Android. I have one too. Um, but is that a material lie? Is that sufficient to be able to um, file, a case with the district attorney's office and say he lied to us? I see a couple no's and I see a yes. Um, okay. There's a lot of no's and I see a yes, so it's kind of a little bit tilted. The answer is no. It's not a material lie. Material would it make any difference to the claim based on the lie? Would we adjudicate the claim? Would we adjust it? Would we compensate it? Would we apportion the claim in any way different based on the information that they provided to us? And if the answer is no, it is not a material statement. If John uses an iPhone, but we discover he uses an Android, unless it's like some sort of cyber claim, and a cyber claim, it may be material, the type of device, but we're not even talking about that in a workers' comp claim or even auto or GL. The reality is this is an injury claim. The phone 99.99% has nothing material to do with the claim. You wouldn't adjust it any different just because of the type of phone that they use. Now, what about if we ask the question, John, have you ever injured your right forearm before? And John says, no, I have not. And then we discover later on that John actually did injure his forearm before, and it wasn't like years ago. I'm talking about maybe days before. Is that lie material? Now, put it in the comment section. Is that material? And can we use that statement now for a potential prosecution? Okay, I see
We are
somebody putting
saying
only if you have
yes.
medicals.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Yes, if we can get records. Yes, and a lot of yeses. Great. Hold the thought about records. We're going to talk about that right now. So to answer the question in short, yes, that is a material lie. John told us that he did not injure his right forearm before, and we discover, and through discovery, I mean actually finding records, that he actually did sustain a right forearm injury in the past, that would be a material lie. Why? Because we would, at the bare minimum, apportion the claim differently. Maybe the PD rating would change. Maybe other compensation aspects of the claim would change. There's a direct financial impact of knowing that this is a pre existing injury, and maybe this became worse because of this new act, but it didn't actually originate entirely from doing their job here, right? And a lot of you, obviously, which is I think all of you here involved in claims would know, there's at the minimum a direct financial impact. Now, I'm going to give you the full story, by the way, right now, and we're going to go through all these elements real quick again. Financial gain. So, remember what I talked about earlier? Financial gain can be actual financial gain, an actual payment that went out to the claimant. Um, but it doesn't always have to be an actual payment that went out. Only if you were going to make that payment and if you were relying on the information that they provided to you to pay out something, and then last minute you caught it and you actually denied the claim, but you denied it based on the new information that you discovered that they did not willingly give you, but you discovered that information through your investigation, you could still meet this element here and for a prosecution. And identifying the perpetrator, this is important because believe it or not, in the age that we're living right now of AI and deep fakes and being able to clone yourself, just with a couple of minutes through an app, we need to be able to identify that it was actually John, the one filing this claim, and John was the one making these statements, and John was the one that perpetrated this entire claim, so that then the DA's office can charge John with insurance fraud. Otherwise, if John goes on leave and then all we receive is an email saying, hey, remember that one day, that one time, that one month when it was like 69 degrees outside and it sprinkled a little bit and I was wearing like an orange jacket, and all of a sudden, like that little buffer gear starts going in your brain. Yeah, I injured myself while I was working, and nobody witnessed it. And I didn't say nothing because I was afraid that I would get terminated. But now thinking about it, no, this is a work injury, and I need you to, take responsibility for it. How do we know that's actually John, the one emailing this? And maybe it's not somebody else, or it's an AI, or it's something. Okay, we still receive that as an initial report, right? But we need to make contact with John. Let's get on the phone with John, and preferably, even I. This is my personal preference. Not that the district attorney offices across different counties have different opinions, but I like personally when we are going after somebody, or potentially we have a lot of suspicion of fraud, that we interview them in person, that we spend some time, that we interview them in person, so that we can actually verify their ID, we can actually take a photo of them, we can actually have a conversation with them, and this is an actual flesh person that I'm talking to, and we as an investigator can attest and say, yes, on this day at this time, I sat with John Doe at his residence. I verified him through his California driver's license. I also verify him through, he told me his social security number. He verified all of his identifying information. And here's a photo of him. And here's the recording of our interview as well. And you have all these things that now make it very difficult for John to then come up, or an attorney, and then say, wait, you never interviewed John in person. You never verify his identity. You just kind of took a statement. So how do you, that was somebody else that cloned his voice and was pretending to be John because they don't like John, and we don't know who that person is, but they don't like John, and so they kind of orchestrated this whole thing to get back at my client. Does it sound like BS? Yeah. Can we prove that there was actually John? I don't know. We're gonna have to go back through everything, right? And make sure that we can. So what ended up happening with this case that I'm talking about, and kind of, bring it home here. This was a police detective. He showed up on Monday to work out at the city gym before his shift, and they actually get compensated to exercise. They're first responders. I'm not sure if this is at all cities, but some cities do compensate their first responders to show up and exercise. And so it being on the clock and exercising and being something that is within the course and scope of his employment, it in all eyes, it would be a compensable claim, right? AOE COE is met, relying upon that what he's saying is true. So he reports the claim on Tuesday. The claim gets filed. The risk manager and the adjuster is like, something doesn't seem right. Let's do a social media check on this guy. And so we do a social media check. We ended up finding out that he had a barbecue party at home that weekend. We're like, okay, there was some activity. He didn't say nothing about that when the adjuster called him and asked him about, what he had done over the weekend and kind of what led to this. And so now you're starting to build some roadblocks. Then, we're not doing a medical canvas yet, but the adjuster and the risk manager decide to conduct a very critical component, which I think it's one of the best things that you could do early on in a claim, especially when somebody's not represented, which is take their statement. And so we reached out. He wanted to meet at the police department, in his office at the detective bureau, and so we did, and and we interviewed him. And so during that course, yeah, I came to the city gym, I exercised, yeah, I was weightlifting, kind of pull my right forearm, and overnight starting feeling more pain. I woke up this morning just feeling very tense. I'm having a hard time grasping and doing my normal movements. This is affecting my work because obviously I'm a first responder. So now he's filing the claim. And as we're interviewing him and we are concluding the interview, we throw something that we call a bait question. And a bait question sounds like this: John, thanks for taking the time to meet with us. Through the process, we obviously obtain your medical records, and we verify obviously the details that you're giving us, just like you do with the cases that you investigate. We do the same thing too. And so once we receive a copy of your medical history, would there be any reason why we would find a pre-existing right right forearm injury or anything with the right forearm that happened before this that you haven't told us about? And so again, we're not asserting that we have that information. We're not even asserting that it exists. We're just saying once we get that medical history, would there be any reason, right? So we're creating a hypothetical situation. Would there be any reason why this would be included in your medical history? And he paused and he thought about it. As a police detective, he knows investigative techniques, and he said no. This was the first time I injured my right forearm. Concluded it, declaring the penalty of perjury. Everything's all recorded and everything. On the way back home, he calls again and he says, hey, this was to our investigator. Hey, I need to change my statement. Well, what do you mean change your statement, John? I mean, there's not really changing a statement, but we can add additional information you want to provide. What's going on? Well, you left, and I kept thinking about that question that you asked at the end. And look, man, I just want to come clean. I did actually injure myself over the weekend. It was on Sunday. I was barbecuing at home. I was lifting a barbecue grill, and I pulled my right forearm. And you're gonna find out because you're gonna get my Kaiser records, right? I went to Kaiser and I got treatment for it, and they gave me some pain medication. I was in really intense pain, and then I went next day to the gym and at the city, and I continue having that pain. So I decided to just report it on Tuesday. Sorry, I just didn't know what else to do. I mean, it just felt easy, but that's what happened. And obviously at that point, do we have a prosecutable case? Let's see, drop it in the comment section there. We have his statement, we have the misrepresentation. He actually admitted to us that lying and misrepresenting this. Is that enough at that point to file it with the district attorney's office? And like somebody here in the comments said, lock him up, right? Uh, Yayish, I'm gonna say yes, with some work still to do. Why? Because remember, we need to meet the beyond reasonable doubt burden proof. Is that statement enough to deny the claim? Yeah, most likely. You can just deny the claim, right? He admitted it to you. Everything makes sense. You're gonna get you have a signed medical release from him, which you get during the recorded statement, and you'll get those records and you just deny the claim. But is that enough to prosecute? Well, to prosecute, we need to be able to prove that, did he even go to the gym on Monday? Was this true or was this a lie? Because if it was a lie, then he created this whole situation just to make it seem like he had been injured at work when that never actually happened. And that's what we call hard fraud. There's hard fraud and there's soft fraud. Hard fraud is when it was completely bogus and just created. Soft fraud is, yes, you actually did get injured. And then over time, you just kind of malingered. You just decided that's kind of nice to be home with the kids and, all that stuff. And you just prolong your off work time. So how do we prove that hard fraud? Well, we actually went to the city. We actually got the logs of the gym because they have to scan their badge. And guess what? There's no indication that he ever went to the gym on Monday. We also obviously got the records and showed that, yeah, he did go to Kaiser Sunday, and he did go for right form. And there was the questions that the doctor asked him and the pain medication. So we have all that medical information. Then we have the social media postings and all those captures, but not just screenshots, with actual metadata and everything, and copying the full web pages, so that if he ever claims that this is fake and we generated it with AI to just, kind of go after him, because that's all we do in the world is just randomly go after people, we can actually prove that no, you actually did upload this, and this is actually from Instagram, and here's the metadata, and here's the photos that you took, and they came from this phone, and they were taken at this time on this day at this location. And that showed that he was barbecuing. And so now, putting all those things together, then now we have a good case that we can present over to the DA's office. And so it isn't always about one single investigative tool. It isn't always about, okay, let's do surveillance because I think this employee's lying. We catch him at the gym, weightlifting. I think I actually have one of our, a lot of our clients here, but I saw a name earlier, so she'll recognize that as soon as I give this scenario. It isn't about that employee going to that Planet Fitness and weightlifting and, doing all sorts of crazy exercise movements. If then that footage, when you show it to the doctor is going to say, oh no, that actually doesn't hurt him, that makes him better. Oh, then how do you prosecute him for fraud if the medical expert, right, the doctor, says, well, that doesn't make him worse, that actually makes him better? Then is it a material lie? Is this knowledge and intent? Are we really having a fraudulent component here? So it's important to bring everybody to the table. And what I would say is, obviously, it's difficult to cover everything within 1 hour. Fraud is, it's complex, but what you want to do is, I'm a big believer in always just getting everybody on the same call. Get the risk manager, get the adjuster, get the defense attorney, get your investigations firm, get that SIU on that call, and then just put your brains together. The adjuster is going to have certain perspectives because they're the ones adjusting the claim. The risk manager is usually on the employer side, so they're going to have information that maybe they gathered through their employees, maybe tips, maybe certain things, a certain history that they have on this person. The defense attorney is going to be looking at it from the legal perspective, right? More from how do we deny this claim, right? The attorney's not necessarily, most of the times won't go through like the prosecutorial stage, but more like how do we defend the claim? How do we have an affirmative stance on the denial? How do we do that? And SIU is going to be looking at it more from the stand of, yeah, let's help you mitigate this claim. Let's help you determine that information, verify it. But if there is suspicion of fraud and we start getting those indicators, let's actually start building that case. And that truly requires a combination of a lot of things. Surveillance is important, but I'm going to say it's not always the best tool. Sometimes the best tool, which is the one I was talking about earlier, is an interview. The interview, that's the most crucial step. Get a statement from them, especially early on when they are not represented. You could still talk to them, obviously, through a deposition once they're represented, but now you have an attorney that's coaching them, that's doing all sorts of things, and you want to get that as raw as possible in the initial stages. And so this is usually where fraud cases fail. And this is one of the quickest ways that you can fix them today is start interviewing people more, but not just interviewing them yourself. Either you have trained personnel within yourself to interview them, or I would say, have a neutral third party provider like an investigations firm that can go out and actually interview them. Why? Because that firm doesn't work for you. So what incentive do they have, to move things one way or another? It becomes stronger once you submit that to a district attorney's office, that a licensed private investigator actually interview them, that is a neutral third party to the case, and this is the information that they gathered from this person. And now based on that information that you gather, then you do a very strategic discovery phase or investigative phase. We talk to them. They say they cannot drive. They say they cannot stand for longer than 5 minutes. Say they can't even get in their car. They don't drive anymore. They can't lift their grandchildren. They're doing all sorts of things that they're telling you, and you're documenting all this. Now surveillance becomes very strategic. Why? Because we are looking to compare their statement with their physical activities. And if this is a psyche claim, then you're looking to compare it with their interactions, with the way they're socializing. Are they laughing? Are they usually just home, and do they seem depressed? Right? You're comparing that. So now it becomes much more objective rather than subjective. A lot of physical activity in surveillance, it's not always a slam dunk, but it could be a slam dunk if in their statement they told you that they could not do that, and you use very objective questions to be able to determine that. Then you have that, then you can go out and do a medical canvas, social media, all that stuff, and go through those motions. So I'm gonna pause there. We have about 12 minutes left, and let's roundtable some questions. If you have anything, toss it out. Happy to kind of roundtable through anything. And I'll put my contact info here in the chat as well, or we'll send it over to all of you. You can always reach out as well. I'm always happy to connect and roundtable anything that you have. Diane, let me know if you also see any questions too on your end.
I will do. I do see that someone does say thank you very much for the presentation and that it was well done.
Thank you. I see somebody that put a scenario here. Let's see. I'm just gonna try to read through it quickly.
Well, while you're reading that, it was a very interesting topic. And I think one of the things you mentioned was the cloning. I'm wondering, how often does that happen? Are we seeing that actually show up in cases nowadays?
That's a great question. We have not seen it yet come up on a case where we're filing for prosecution. However, we are starting to see it more and more often on social media when we're doing social media checks that people are creating clones of themselves and posting that content. So think about, I actually have a good background to be able to talk about this because I'm also a content creator. So think about content creation and how monetization works. You have to have certain engagements, certain subscribers, and all these things. And so, but it takes time to record videos. You have
Right.
to, do it in person or yourself, and then there's editing and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of work and a lot of resources that go into just putting one video together versus if I can just take a couple photos of myself, record my voice, and then just have this app create a clone of me, and then all I do is I just texted, a prompt, a script, and say, hey, I want you to create a quick 30-second video of why fraud affects everybody in the entire country and why everybody should care more about it. Then it would do it, and it would actually look like me with my voice talking, but it's not actually me. And so then if we're looking, from a claim perspective to use that against somebody during the claim adjudication process, and to potentially ding that against them to apportion the claim, or maybe they claim that they can't talk because they have a mastication issue, but now in the video you're seeing them talk. Is it really them or is it the AI? And that's where metadata and exif data are so important to go through that, and it's very important for everybody to make sure that particularly their social media checks are being captured at that level. That's not just a screenshot, but that these things are actually being preserved in the background and they're actually being verified so that you could take an affirmative action on that claim and not something that you're going to make a decision today and then get a bad faith lawsuit because it was AI.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. You take a look, there, Thomas left a message. It's a pretty long one, so if you take a look at that, I'm going to make a few announcements while you read that, and then you can answer Thomas's questions. So we do have a pretty robust program for you for the summer school series. We have 10 webinars that are going to be available for you this month, and we'll have one on Friday. There's a doctor that will be speaking. It's on sports medicine. And then we are going to have 3 next week. I will not be available, but my colleagues are going to come and host that for you, and they will do a fabulous job, as will the speakers. And we would like to invite you to go to our website, macropro.com, and you can sign up for any of those there. We are always trying to provide great content. So if there's anything in particular you would like to see, please let me know, and I'll be happy to wrestle up a couple speakers on that particular topic. Now, we do have also in-person events. So if you're in the Ontario area on Wednesday of next week, this is why I will not be on the webinars. I will be there, and we are going to be hosting our Macro Pro and Friends one-day conference. There's no charge for it, but you will receive 6 CEU credits, which is an awful lot. You can come for one day. We're going to feed you and entertain you. There'll be door prizes, handout materials, etc. It'll be a great day. So we hope that you can join us. And if you can, please sign up for that on the MacroPro website as well. All right, Chris, that was my announcements. Do you have anything you would like to say to Thomas?
Yes, I'm actually going to answer Thomas' question and then BJ's question too, because I think it's both of them are good. So Tom on Thomas' particular scenario with staffing agencies and not having the appropriate, let's say, workers' compensation coverage, and then referring a suspicious claim to law enforcement. What I'll say about that, Thomas, is that there's a lot of contributing factors, right? One is the potential insured fraud, the premium fraud, with the staffing agency not having the proper coverage. However, if the fraud is lying more on the claimant, the employee that misrepresented something, and then there just wasn't coverage, there could still be a path to refer that to law enforcement, but there's just not one cookie cutter way of answering that question because there's a lot of contributing factors. So I'll definitely love to connect and kind of roundtable that more, because there's a lot of things that could be done. A lot of another thing to consider, and I mean for everybody else, if you're in the staffing world, is that staffing is it's their employees, and you are an employer retaining a staffing agency. That could be great for you, and it could have a great return of investment. We have a lot of staffing clients and I love them. But talking about, again, from that premium fraud standpoint, is you need to have the right contracts and the right documentation in place. Otherwise, you could potentially become that statutory employer, and there could be some liability yourself. And obviously, that's something a roundtable with your defense attorney. But lastly, to touch on BJ's question, this is a great question, which is, you establish all elements and then you submit it to the DA's office and then they reject the case. How do you handle that? That's a great question. And there's two reasons for the most part why district attorney's office would reject the case. One, you may have actually not strongly met all elements. You may believe you met all the elements, but in their eyes, you may have not strongly met all elements. Or two, the case may not be appealing in their eyes to spend the time to prosecute it. And what I mean by that is, if somebody ultimately ended up getting a $500 check, and yes, they misrepresented everything, you have all elements covered, but the loss, the monetary value is like $500 or $1,000, they're very likely sometimes to not take that case. And again, I'm not speaking for all counties. Some counties would even do it for $500. Like, they're very aggressive. But depending on their appetite, they may not do it, and they might cite lack of resources. Because if they have to pick between going after somebody for $500 versus going to somebody for $250,000, they're going to go after the $250,000, which is frying the bigger fish, right? But what I would tell you, and I would tell everybody, is use that as a learning opportunity. That's what I did when my case was first rejected. When I first started, sit down with them and just be like, hey, okay, you're rejecting this case. Tell me, what am I missing? Or what can we do better? Right? In your eyes as the district attorney, where did we fail and how do we make our case stronger? And I guarantee you 99% of the time, they will spend the time to sit down with you and actually give you a roadmap of how to make your cases stronger. Why? District attorneys' offices, they get they get certain uh, grants for prosecuting fraud. And so the more they prosecute it, the more grants they get, the more money. So they want to prosecute it. They want to take your case, but they also want to make sure that this is a case that they can actually prosecute, and that they're not going to assign one of their investigators, spend 2 years investigating it, potentially going in another $100,000 of
Yeah.
spending, and then it results in nothing, right? They don't want to do that because it goes against their budget too. So spend the time, ask them the question. I guarantee you they'll spend the time to sit down with you, and bring in your SIU department as well. Reach out to somebody. And we do that all the time with our clients. Hey, reach out to us. We'll sit down. We'll roundtable it with you. We'll kind of build a game plan and build it better after that.
Very nice. Well, I will say that we have people that have taken some fantastic vacations already, like Ireland, and we have people planning on going on cruises and other trips. So I want to wish everybody a safe summer, and wherever you happen to be going on your trip, I hope that you are safe. Marcus, it's your birthday today. So happy birthday to you, Marcus.
Happy
And
birthdays.
someone just said, did you practice not saying it depends? And thank you very much for that, because that seems to be the answer that people give the most when they're asked questions. It depends. So that's nice that they notice that you answered directly.
That's
Um,
awesome. Thank you.
yes,
I have made it a point to not say it depends, because it doesn't add a lot of value.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say that we appreciate you being with us, Chris. This is your first time with us at Macro Pro and Friends. Certainly hope that we will have you back. You have a very calm demeanor, and it's been really fantastic to work with you. So, everybody, we're going to go ahead and end
Thank
the
you.
webinar, and we will see you hopefully on Friday for Doctor's presentation on sports medicine. Anna, she's got her hand up, but Anna, can you tell
I'll
us what?
stick around. I'll stick around for a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions.
Very good. All right, everybody. Bye bye now.